from WXXI News, a subsidiary of NPR. They thought they were headed for high times. Then New York botched its legal cannabis rollout. And you could have seen this coming, or the growers, the sellers, I guess, could have seen this coming. The politicians knew exactly what was going to happen. They did it in California and the West Coast in general. I want to take a look at a video from that side of the country on the other side of this. But they say, on a warm mid-March morning, cannabis farmer Justin Merkel stands on a muddy edge overlooking the 2-acre patch of grassland. This plot makes up the farmland of his company, Lit 420. Oh, very creative. In the summer months, about 1,800 cannabis plants dot the grassy landscape, each one carefully pruned, watered, and tended by hand. A new season is around the bend as the spring and summer months creep in, and Merkel and his cohort of friends, families, and co-workers will once again dig their hands into the soil. But how long can he keep the farm afloat is an ever-present question in Merkel's mind. A combination of the state's snail-paced rollout of legal cannabis dispensaries. Well, it is the state's fault, but the snail-pace... Just leave people alone, right? It was a good gray zone when cannabis was medical, right? And you could just call up the doctor and say, oh, doc, I had a football injury from high school or I can't sleep. And you pay $60 and you could smoke as much weed as you want in a year. In California, it was a little bit more strict. In New York, I think you actually had to prove you were sick, but they threw that out the window and put weed stores on every corner. But it wasn't fast enough, right? Because the feds, the government, couldn't get their hands in their pocket quick enough. But it goes on. I mean, it's just a mess from every angle. It is a real lose-lose, as is the case with most of these situations, I suppose. The high level of taxation on crops, costly cannabis testing, and the entrance of multi-million-dollar corporations into the cannabis space has left the small farmer in crisis. Merkel sunk about $400,000 into his cannabis operation 2 years since receiving his license to legally grow cannabis, has yet to turn a profit. $400,000. When you could have just put a couple plants in your closet, but you wanted to sell it to the entire state. And I guess so, right? We're all capitalists here. Well, no, not all of us. Some of us are communists, which is exactly why this is happening. But you can't set up shop, and he probably knows now, but you can't set up shop in New York.
New York was already a loser state. Like California is a loser state. There are many loser states because of policy, high taxes, uncompetitive regulation. It was already on the top of the list of being a loser state. I would never invest in New York now.
You can't retire in California. Those things are completely off the table. Like a dozen other cannabis farmers in New York, he sees little means for survival beyond a state bailout. Okay, so he sunk $400,000 into this and now wants the state to bail him out. At this point, it's an uphill battle, Merkel said. Now the advantage we had as the first movers is taken away from us. All we really have left is potentially this relief. If this farmer's relief doesn't go through, most of us will be out of the business, unfortunately. That's exactly what they want, and they're going to claim that they're going to give it to people of color, even though they're not going to do that either. It's all I don't think this guy's a person of color, but we don't really know exactly. And of course, that's a mask, right? Oh, well, we're going to give it to all of the downtrodden people of color. They love smoking weed. It's going to be their thing. It's all a complete mess. No matter how you slice it, there is going to be a problem. The relief referenced is a state aid package currently included in both the state Senate and Assembly's budget proposals, which could give small cannabis farmers a fighting chance in New York's legal market. I guess so. Is $400,000 to grow weed a small thing? I don't know. A stalled rollout. Merkel began growing cannabis. Hang on, let me go back. Okay, there we go. Merkel began growing cannabis well before legalization. As a teenager, he was a practitioner of guerrilla farming, a tactic of finding pockets of untrodden public land and cultivating cannabis plants. And yeah, that's probably where you should have stayed. Cannabis was always a part of his life. Then the opportunity to start planting legally popped up in 2019. He jumped on it. At the time, plants could only be grown for hemp and CBD, but Merkel saw adult use legalization on the horizon and jumped on the chance to get a cultivation license. Yeah, anytime that you're going to beg the government to let you do something, you know it's not going to end well. And the hemp stuff, I don't know too much about, but as far as CBD, they're constantly, before full legalization, before there was weed stores on every corner in New York, or bodegas or delis, or, you know, liquor stores, not liquor stores, that's a different thing, California, New York, I digress. But before that, they had CBD plants in little delis and little markets, and you can never, I'm no scientist, I'm no doctor, I'm no lawyer, but you can never fully separate CBD and THC like they were pretending they were. In 2022, the year after the state legalized recreational cannabis, Merkel was awarded his conditional adult use cannabis cultivator license by the state. That license allowed him to grow cannabis outdoors and provide it to dispensaries, of which the state predicted it would have a healthy network by the time the 2022 grow season ended. But a problem arose. Yeah. Oh, look at that. Tess, whatever, on her cannabis farm in Corning during the 2022 growing season. Another big, mean, scary white person that should not be allowed to grow cannabis, because that is for the people of color, and we're going to take the money out of their pockets. No dispensaries were open by the time the flowers have harvested and cured. Lawsuit after lawsuit over New York's racial and social equity driven conditional adult use retail dispensary license program had put legal bud on ice. That left farmers sitting on thousands of pounds of cannabis that cannot be legally sold due to the federal illegality of recreational cannabis. New York farmers can only sell and distribute in New York. As farmers began to feel the squeeze, Merkel and Tess of Grateful Valley Farm in Corning co-founded the Cannabis Farmers Alliance, CFA, to advocate for the needs of New York's weed farmers. And because the state has already separated cannabis growers of color and non-growers of color, they have really no choice but to cater to the big, mean, scary white people. The state assured us, saying, grow as much as you can, and the stores will be there. They said they'd have 50 stores by the end of... You were expecting them to keep their word. You were expecting them to provide you with a place to sell the product you begged them to let you grow. It's ridiculous. They said they have 50 stores by the end of 2022 for us to sell. They opened the first one close to midnight on New Year's Eve. It's been a disaster, to say the least. Yet, what were you expecting? Today, New York has 80 dispensaries statewide. There's 80 in a 5-block radius in San Francisco, California. They're on every corner in Arizona as well. Today, well, hold on. Did we already read that part? 80 dispensaries statewide. Yes. That is a tiny number versus a place like California or even Arizona. Shelf space is limited, and Merkel has received no reorders from any dispensary that initially carried his bud. Meanwhile, the burden of cost falls largely on the farmer in the forms of costly quality testing and a state potency tax. The latter costs half a cent for every milligram of THC in the flower. And this is another thing that they do, right? When it went from medical to recreational in California, you know, there was a lot of gray area, but then then they started trying to track seed to sale and put caps on the amount of THC and track and trace everything. And I believe they taxed a lot of the California weed businesses, you know, weed farmers out of business, I should say. And obviously that's what they were trying to do here with these people. But it's absolutely insane that these people, right? I'm all over the place here, but the government officials in New York knew that they needed more money, so they got these people to beg them to let them grow cannabis, told them they were going to have a place to sell it, didn't have a place to sell it when they were, I'm sure, making money hand over fist before the government stepped in. So they tried to go legit. but they just couldn't do it. In practice, a high-strength bud from Merkel's farm at 31% THC was potency taxed at $10 per quarter ounce, or $640 per pound. Estimates from the CFA state that for every $100 worth of cannabis concentrate sold at market, 37 goes to the dispensary, 21 to state taxes, and 19 each goes to the processor and distributor. The remaining $4 is the farmer share. So quite simply, it's not worth it. They put you out of business, and I'm sure if it hasn't already happened, they're going to be growing their own cannabis and selling it to you and telling you that everything else has fentanyl in it because we also left the border wide open. For an eighth ounce of cannabis flower, which typically retails in the $40 to $50 range at a dispensary, this lady estimated she profits about $2. So yeah, long story short, doesn't work, not worth it. And if a farmer fails a quality test, the flower can no longer be sold as smokable, leaving concentrates as the only path forward. This was the case with this lady with her first crop, which did not make it through a pass-fail test for the common fungus aspergillus. And there's another weirdo regulation, right, where people have been smoking this stuff for many years now without all these tests, but the government comes in and say, this is how much it costs, you need to pass this test, and puts everybody out of business. Meanwhile, they're telling you that, oh yeah, it's okay, a little boy can make the choice to become a little girl, and here's the scissors. While a necessary step to ensure safety and purity of the product, cannabis testing is a costly endeavor borne entirely by the farmer. There are 17 laboratories authorized to test cannabis. And this was a joke I made a long time ago, that the testing facilities, they test for THC and all this, it's just two guys in a car smoking your weed. So you give them a little bit and they smoke and they say, 17%. None of it's even real, bro. Okay, the 17 laboratories authorized to test cannabis products across New York. One is in Rochester. The labs perform highly specialized testing of cannabis products with an exhaustive checklist that include everything from THC content to the presence of multiple forms of bacteria, mold, and chemical pesticides. And that's probably good, but you overplayed the hand, right? You want it to be safe as it can possibly be, but you're lobbing on everything in order to, I guess, eventually buy these people out, and then, kickback Kathy will be in control of all of it. We spent about $20,000 in testing and still failed everything. All said and done, her intake for the entire 2022 grow season, which yielded about 80 pounds of flower, was sold for $400 a pound to a processor. If that amount were sold an eighth of an ounce at a time, assuming a $50 eighth retail price, which is still sky high. And if you'll notice, one of the only things that has actually gotten cheaper in the past handful of years is weed, because they want you to be smoking as much as humanly possible, at least in California, so you're not going to pay attention to what the political thugs are doing. It would generate $6,400 per pound, 16 times the value of the sale price prior to a processor. Of the 200 or so farmers in the Cannabis Farmers Alliance network, 97% have yet to see a profit, Merkel and Interlakia said. David vs. Goliath. New York's cannabis legalization law, the Marijuana Regulation and Taxation Act, envisioned a cannabis future led by small entrepreneurs and the people once harmed by criminalization. But from the beginning, farmers like this woman and this dude foresaw the arrival of big business into the cannabis world. Again, I'm definitely no expert, but it sounds like $400,000 is quite a bit. That became a reality in December when the Cannabis Control Board approved 6 medical cannabis registered operators to enter the recreational market. Among them are PharmaCann, Rise, Curaleaf, and Columbia Care. Registered operators have 2 distinct advantages over conditional cultivators. They are high-dollar operations already well established in the cannabis space, able to charge lower wholesale prices, and perhaps more importantly, they are allowed by law to grow indoors. Who's this guy? Okay, that's him. Definitely not a person of color, and he's feeling that squeeze right now. Indoor grown cannabis has a general reputation of being higher quality than outdoor or greenhouse grown cannabis. While that is a subject of debate in the cannabis farmers world, they acknowledge that the average consumer sees cannabis from those suppliers as higher quality for less cost. They're selling $100 ounces of indoor weed. That makes more sense. That's California prices, right? I mean, it's just ridiculous. What used to cost $60 for an eighth in California a decade, maybe a little bit more than a decade ago, now is going for $10, $12. Their marketing is insane. They buy display cases and everything for dispensaries. You go in there and their names are on the floor mats and all over the walls. There's no way we can even compete. Again, you spent the $400,000. I guess that was the dude. I thought they were partners. Think they are partners, but $400,000 doesn't seem like a small business to me, but perhaps I am wrong. I'm very wrong. Maybe $1 million to set up a grow operation is a big operation. Maybe $10 million, maybe $400,000 is absolutely nothing. For the small farmers, the arrival of registered operators into the market before they had a chance to get on their feet only compounded a harsh entrepreneurial environment. A path forward. A bill before the state's Cannabis Control Board would waive the license fee for those conditional cultivators as they transition to full licensure or micro businesses. The proposal acknowledges that these early adopting farmers suffered a sufficient need for financial assistance. So I guess now you're going to give the white people money too. The board is scheduled to go to a vote on the measure Friday, but cannabis farmers say more relief is needed. Yeah, we need more money. That's always the answer to everything, which it kind of is, right? I need more money. We all need more money, but that's always what it is for the government takeovers. And, the same thing with the minimum wage workers. We always just need more money because the government came in and screwed everything up. They saw a glimmer of hope last year in the form of so-called cannabis grower showcases. That program allowed cannabis farmers to skirt court injunctions preventing the opening of dispensaries and sell directly to the public. The program ended at the end of 2023, but for the first time, it allowed small farmers to get some return on their investment. It was a struggle up until the showcase, said Mike Dolan, owner of Geneva's A-Walk in the Pines. That really just helped us burn through all of the product we had from 2022 in 30 days. With the showcases now over, cannabis farmers are seeking different means to survive. Two programs pointed to as potential boons for small farmers: the Cannabis Micro Business Program, which allows farmers to sell directly to consumers. Merkel is on the list of farmers up to participate in that program and described its provisions as potentially life-saving for its farm. And just as an aside, when New York was ushering in all these weirdo cannabis, sellers of color and licenses and all that stuff, were they really under the impression that the people they arrested, all the black and brown people they arrested that love smoking pot so much were going to fix it? Did they think those people were growing enough weed in their New York City apartments? They were just dope dealers. They weren't, and I'm not knocking it, right? They were just dealers. They weren't growing this stuff. They weren't up on the mountain, and now you're pretending that you were going to give it to them. But like I said, most of them weren't growers, so they're probably not even applying. They're applying for maybe some business licenses to retail the stuff on the Manhattan streets and bodegas all around the city. But they were never growers. Most, not all. This is ridiculous. The second hope is a farmer relief fund. The relief fund was included in budget proposals from the state assembly and Senate. Included in the Senate proposal is $60 million for loans to cannabis farmers, $40 million for grants, $28 million in tax credits, and a repeal and replacement of the potency tax. State Senator Jeremy Cooney, Democrat from Rochester, heads up the Senate's cannabis subcommittee, which probably we don't need. It's just another layer of bureaucracy. Everyone was told that hemp was the way of the future and to start growing hemp, but that didn't happen, Cooney said. So we gave those farmers the first bite of an apple. They did everything right and it fell flat. Now we need to repair the harm that's been done. So yes, the government stepped in. Well, first it was going fine. It was illegal. You had people like Kamala Harris taking people out for selling it, right? Different story. Then the government stepped in, ruined everything, and now they're writing even more laws or more bills or whatever to fix the problem that they created. Absolutely classic. Coney puts the onus of the blame for the sputtering legal weed industry on legal injunctions and a booming black market. Both this woman and this dude work day jobs to keep their heads above water. She is a nurse practitioner while Merkel is in heating, ventilation, and air conditioning. Merkel has sunk every penny he had into his farm's survival and nearly lost his house to foreclosure. The woman, Interlakia, whatever, had to sell her farm's tractor just to keep the farm running, an irony that isn't lost on her. When a farmer has to sell their tractor in order to survive, you're at the end of your rope. In their time in the CFA, they've seen farmers' families crumble, investments evaporate, and some growers driven to the brink of harming themselves. Wow. That's pretty crazy, right? Like, if the government comes down so hard, so heavy-handed, it's all mismanaged, that you decide this literally isn't worth it instead of just going into another business, but whatever. If relief doesn't come soon, Merkel is unsure how long he or any other small farmer can stick it out. But for him and farmers like him across the state, the passion towards cannabis drives them forward in the hope that a brighter day will come. Sitting atop a vintage Ford tractor, Merkel exhales a plume of smoke that drifts over his field. A dank herbal scent fills the air. You know, I don't think there's any industry I'd rather be in. Okay, well, this is pretty crazy. Par for the course, right? They come in and ruin everything. But like I mentioned at the top, they could probably see this coming. From the Associated Press, almost exactly a year earlier, April 19th, 2023, race to the bottom. West Coast legal pot is struggling, so they could have seen it coming, but they did it anyways.
In Oregon, a warehouse of pot waiting to be sold.
Oregon grows way more weed than it can consume.
Yeah, and even with that, most of the people in Oregon, the junkies, the users, are on fentanyl passed out on the street.
California, an empty grow room that was meant to house plants, now abandoned by its owners.
You know, you gotta know when you cut your losses.
It's been more than a decade since Colorado and Washington became the first states to legalize recreational marijuana. Since then, 19 states have followed. But along the West Coast, which dominated the production of high-quality marijuana before legalization, the market is teetering.
Everybody from the retail side to the grower side within cannabis circles will talk about a race to the bottom.
One big problem, too much weed. Oregon regulations.
Yeah, so they, quite literally did this exact same thing. So, right, is that not proof that they wanted this exact thing to happen, right? There's no way that the lawmakers or the growers in New York didn't watch this happen along the entire West Coast.
Regulators reported in February that the state was sitting on 3 million pounds of unused cannabis.
Wonderful experiment. Oregon, unlike other states, had a system of basically unlimited licenses, which encouraged a large number of people to get into the cultivation side.
The oversupply is slashing revenue in Oregon. In California and Washington, income that was already heavily taxed dropped as their gluts grew. Wholesale.
Okay, so they're growing too much. They got a little bit heavy-handed, so it's not all the fault of the government. But as soon as they say, oh, it's fully legal, then people started rushing to grow this stuff, and it fell flat on its face. So now you have way too much stuff, and the taxes and the regulation are far too high for anybody to keep up with.
Prices have recovered somewhat after plunging in California, but inflation is gouging operators' bottom lines.
Yeah, well, I don't know exactly how inflation plays into this, but I do know, like I mentioned before, that one of the very few things that has gotten cheaper in the last 4 or 5 years is weed. I wonder why.
Don't know any companies that are really making money. And the most successful companies tend to be the ones that were able to raise the most capital and survive the longest downturn. And
That could be said for any industry.
we'll see how long, the biggest ones can hold out.
Oversupply is good news for customers who are buying at low prices, and tax revenues from pot are still robust. Still, many farmers and retailers are scraping by or leaving.
Yep. So the cheap prices are good for the average pot smoker. The taxes are bad for the growers, the retailers, the operations. But it's just crazy to watch these people. Something that was on the fringe. It was, deregulated. It was completely fake and phony. Oh yeah, doc, I got an injury from high school. All of that nonsense ballooned into something that was totally legitimized to where Uncle Sam could put his hands in their pocket and destroy all of the businesses.